The dust came off on my palm in a single gray sheet, and that was when the last pod woke up. I didn't mean anything by it. 6 days the survey team had been trying. Counselor Veth with her override codes, Engineer Doss with his cutting rig, the xeno-archaeologist, whose name I never learned, running every harmonic frequency the compact's toolkit carried. The pod had sat at the far end of the cryobay, dark and sealed and indifferent, while the 14 empties beside it gave up their contents without protest. Dried organic residue, trace atmosphere, nothing useful. The dead ship had surrendered everything except that last unit. So when I finished my evening medical log and walked past it on my way to the hatch, I did what any person does with a dirty surface. I wiped it. Bare palm, one stroke left to right, the lights came on. Not the pod's external indicators. All 14 centimeters of the thing's face erupted in pale gold script, characters stacking from base to crown, in under 2 seconds, dense and interlocking, and moving the way water moves when you disturb it from below. I stepped back. My boot heel caught the deck seam, and I nearly went down, and the script followed me. Not the whole panel, but a narrow thread of it, a single line of characters that swung toward me like a compass needle finding north. Mara. Doss was at my shoulder. I hadn't heard him cross the bay. Don't move. I wasn't moving. I was watching the script. It was not a language in the compact's library. I checked later. And the xenoarchaeologist confirmed it. Not Vihari, not the predecessor dialects, nothing catalogued in 400 years of deep survey work. But it was clearly a language. It had grammar. It had weight. And that single thread of it was tracking the movement of my chest as I breathed. It's following her heartbeat, the xenoarchaeologist said from somewhere behind me. Her voice was flat with the particular flatness of a person suppressing something large. Pulse interval. It's matching. Counselor Veth told everyone to back away from the pod except me. I appreciated that she said except me, rather than including me in the general retreat. It meant she understood, at least partly, that this was no longer about the survey. The script ran for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I counted. My medical training gives me an accurate internal clock, and not much else in a fun situation like that, so I counted. The characters cycled, compressed, reorganized, and then stilled. The panel went from a moving surface to something that looked almost like a finished document. Dense columns of gold script on a dark field, with one short line isolated at the bottom, set apart from the rest the way a signature is set apart from the body of a letter. Then the seal broke. There was no dramatic sound. A thin line of cold air hissed from the join between panel and frame, and the panel swung inward on an axis I couldn't have predicted, and inside there was no body. I had expected a body. Everyone had expected a body. That was the premise of the entire 6-day effort, that this last occupied pod held something biological, a specimen, or a record keeper, or perhaps the ship's final crew member preserved against the long drift. What was inside instead was light. A lattice of it, three-dimensional, suspended in a medium I could not identify and have not been able to identify since, despite submitting samples to 3 separate compact facilities. The lattice was roughly cylindrical, perhaps a meter tall, and it rotated slowly on its vertical axis, and every filament in it was the same pale gold as the script on the panel. It was warm. I know because I reached out before Doss could stop me, and the outer edge of the lattice met my fingertips, and it was exactly as warm as living skin. The rotation stopped. The lattice reorganized. It took perhaps 15 seconds, and in those 15 seconds, every person in the cryobay held their breath. I know because I could suddenly hear the ship's ventilation, which I had stopped noticing 3 days into the survey. Then the lattice was still and oriented, and every filament's terminus was pointed at me. It spoke. I say spoke because there is no better word. There was no mechanical sound component, no vibration in the air. The meaning arrived in my mind the way your own thoughts arrive. From inside, sourceless, immediate, 4 words, and they were not in any language the compact cataloged. But I understood them without effort or translation, the way you understand the word for fire in a dream. Seed of the first breath, that was all. I stood there with my fingertips against warm light and 40,000 years of sealed silence behind me, and I understood what it meant. Not because the lattice explained it. It didn't. Not because I was a scientist or a linguist or a woman of particular learning. I understood it because some part of me had always carried the weight of it without knowing what the weight was. We were not an accident. Shh. That is the plain fact of what the vault contained, encoded in a lattice of light that had waited 400 centuries for one specific living person to walk through the hatch of a dead ship on a dead world and wipe dust from a panel with her bare hand. Civilization that built this ship, older than the compact by an order of magnitude we do not yet have instruments to measure, did not discover humanity. They made the conditions for it. A breath, a seed, a single genetic signature threaded through an unbroken chain of living people across 40,000 years, dormant and invisible and waiting for the vault to confirm it. My genetic signature, mine and every ancestor behind me, and whatever children or grandchildren come after. The xeno-archaeologist was crying. I heard her before I turned around. Quiet, controlled, the way people cry when they are trying not to. Doss had one hand pressed flat against the nearest empty pod, steadying himself. Counselor Veth was already speaking into her comm, low and fast, calling back to the relay station, and I could tell from her voice that she was choosing words with the care of a person who knows the words will be repeated for a very long time. Turned back to the lattice. It was still oriented toward me. It would stay that way, I learned later. Pointing at me regardless of where I moved in the bay, regardless of distance, up until we left the ship and it folded itself back into the pod, and the seal closed again. Patient. Absolute. As if it had never doubted I would come. I am a field medic. I have set bones in bad gravity and sutured wounds in worse light and delivered 2 babies on survey postings where the nearest hospital was 3 weeks away. I am not a woman who has ever thought of herself as the center of anything. I have spent my career at the edges of other people's discoveries, keeping the discoverers alive long enough to make them. But I stood in that cold bay with warm light touching my hand, and I thought, 40,000 years. It waited 40,000 years. For the counselors, or the engineers, or the archaeologists. For me, for whoever I was made from, and whoever made them, all the way back to the first of us, who drew breath on a world that had been prepared for exactly that moment. We were not an accident. I don't know yet what we are supposed to do with that. I don't think anyone does. But I know what the vault said, and I know what it meant. And I know that somewhere in the architecture of what I am, in the marrow and the blood, and whatever passes for the soul in a body built from ancient intention, I have always known it too. Seed of the first breath, that's what we are, every last one of us.